I'm Madison Chen, 35 years old, and I just said one sentence at a family dinner that made my sister's jaw drop to the floor. But let me back up. I'm a luxury real estate agent in Sacramento, California, and my life has been built from every commission check I earned myself. Those early mornings when I got up at dawn to stage million-dollar homes and the late nights driving clients through neighborhoods they could barely afford. While I fought to build my career in one of the most competitive markets in California, my younger sister Bella, 28, lived in an entirely different reality. One where Instagram followers could be bought, credit card debt disappeared with a phone call to our parents, and someone else's success was always available to solve your problems. From age 12, I understood that if I wanted something, I had to work for it. I sold lemonade for hours under the Sacramento sun to buy my own school supplies. Meanwhile, all Bella had to do was pout about wanting designer clothes, and minutes later, our mother Linda would hand over her credit card. My parents always said Bella was the creative one who needed more support, as if having artistic dreams exempted you from basic responsibility. In high school, I worked weekends at a Chinese restaurant, coming home exhausted, but proud, saving every tip for my college fund. Bella was different. When she wanted to attend expensive art camps each summer, Dad simply wrote the checks because she said it would help her find her passion. The difference exploded in college. I earned my MBA from Stanford through scholarships and grueling part-time work, graduating with minimal debt, because I was determined to build my own future. 3 years later, Bella enrolled at UCLA's art program with our parents, covering every expense: tuition, housing, meals, even a car, so she wouldn't have to take public transportation. Then she dropped out after 2 years because she hadn't found her authentic voice. But here's where the story gets interesting. Last week, at what I thought was just another family dinner, Bella announced she was moving into my beautiful 4-bedroom house to start her influencer career, and my parents nodded like this was already decided. That's when I delivered the one sentence that changed everything. My parents, Robert and Linda Chen, immigrated from Taiwan in the early 80s with nothing but engineering degrees and fierce determination. Dad landed a job at Boeing. Mom eventually became a part-time bookkeeper. They built what they considered the American dream in East Sacramento, a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage, good schools, and enough stability to give their daughters opportunities they'd never had. But somewhere along the way, they decided that their youngest daughter was too delicate for the real world, while their eldest was tough enough to handle anything thrown at her. I still remember being 12 years old, setting up my lemonade stand on hot Sacramento mornings, counting quarters to buy the books I wanted for school. 50 cents for pink lemonade, $1 for the fancy strawberry kind. I'd sit there for hours under our neighbor's oak tree, watching cars drive by our middle-class neighborhood, dreaming about the day I'd have enough money to buy whatever I wanted without asking anyone. Meanwhile, my 5-year-old sister Bella would skip out to the front yard in her princess dress, point at something in a store window during our family trips, and within minutes, Mom would be pulling out her wallet. No questions asked, no chores required, just pure, unadulterated want, transformed into immediate gratification. The pattern continued through every stage of our childhood. I worked through high school bussing tables at Golden Dragon Restaurant, while Bella took dance lessons and art classes. I applied for scholarships, studying until 2 in the morning in our shared bedroom, while she slept peacefully, never worried about how she'd pay for college. When acceptance letters came, I chose UC Davis for my undergraduate degree because I could afford it with financial aid and part-time work. Bella, 3 years later, sailed into UCLA's art program with Mom and Dad, covering every expense from tuition to textbooks to that little Honda Civic, so she wouldn't have to take the bus. 2 years in, she dropped out. Just like that. Called home crying about not finding her passion, about feeling lost, about needing time to discover herself. And you know what my parents said? "Come home, sweetheart. We'll figure it out together." While I was grinding through my MBA at Stanford, working as a teaching assistant and living on ramen noodles, Bella was back in her childhood bedroom sleeping until noon and posting inspirational quotes on Instagram about finding your authentic self. Fast forward to today, I'm pulling in over $200,000 a year selling luxury homes in the Sacramento area. I own a beautiful 4-bedroom craftsman-style house in the historic Fabulous 40s neighborhood, the kind of place I used to drive by as a kid and wonder what it would feel like to have keys to a front door like that. Bella is 28 years old and still lives with our parents. She's been there for 6 years now, ever since she dropped out of school. 6 years of mom doing her laundry, dad paying her phone bill, and both of them covering the $1,800 monthly allowance they give her to pursue her dreams of becoming an influencer. They've spent over $180,000 supporting her lifestyle money that came directly out of dad's retirement savings from Boeing. But here's the thing about our family dinners every Sunday. Mom serves her famous orange chicken and steamed rice, Dad asks about my latest real estate deals, and then inevitably the conversation turns to Bella's latest crisis. She needs money for a photography course that will definitely launch her career this time. Her car needs repairs. She's behind on the credit card they co-signed for her. And somehow, I always end up being the bad guy when I suggest maybe, just maybe, she should get a job. They always introduce her to people as our creative daughter, the one with artistic vision. They introduce me as their responsible daughter, the one with the good job. Like being responsible is some kind of consolation prize, and being creative excuses you from basic adult responsibilities. Last month at our cousin Jessica's housewarming party, I watched Mom beam with pride as she showed off photos of Bella's latest Instagram post to the other relatives. 50,000 followers, she announced, as if that number meant something tangible. Meanwhile, I'd just closed on $1 million estate sale that week, but somehow that felt less exciting to her than Bella's latest selfie getting 500 likes. Jessica Chen Martinez is 32, just 3 years younger than me, and she's everything our parents wish their daughters could be. Marketing director at a tech company, married to a wonderful guy named David, 2 adorable kids, and a beautiful home in Roseville. She managed to have both a successful career and a picture-perfect family, which makes her the gold standard in our extended family's eyes. What kills me is that Jessica actually worked for everything she has. She put herself through business school, climbed the corporate ladder, saved money, and made smart choices. But somehow, when our aunts and uncles talk about her success, it always comes back to how lucky she is, how everything just worked out for her. Nobody mentions the 60-hour weeks she put in during her 20s, or the fact that she lived in a studio apartment and drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic until she was 29 because she was busy building her future instead of financing her present. That's the difference between Jessica and Bella. Both grew up in similar families with similar expectations, but one of them learned that success requires sacrifice, and the other learned that tears and manipulation work just as well. And me, I learned that being the responsible one means you get all the pressure and none of the praise. I've been listening to my parents worry about Bella's future for years now, watching them drain their retirement accounts to fund her lifestyle, and I'm tired of being the only person in this family who thinks maybe that's not helping anyone. But every time I bring it up, I'm the selfish sister who doesn't understand family loyalty. The thing is, I love my family. I really do. But love doesn't mean enabling someone to stay stuck in permanent adolescence, and it definitely doesn't mean sacrificing your own stability to fund someone else's fantasy life. As I drove home from last Sunday's dinner, listening to Mom's voicemail about how Bella really needs our support right now because she's going through a tough time, I couldn't help but wonder when exactly my tough times stopped mattering. When did being capable become synonymous with being taken for granted? But I had no idea that my family's definition of support was about to collide with my own definition of boundaries in ways that would change all of our lives forever. And it all started with that one sentence I mentioned at the beginning, the sentence that made my sister's jaw drop and turned our family dinner into the most dramatic evening any of us had experienced in years. But before I tell you what I said, you need to understand exactly what led up to that moment, and why that one sentence had the power to detonate a bomb that had been building in our family for 28 years. The Instagram post started getting more elaborate sometime last fall. Where Bella used to share simple selfies with generic inspirational captions, suddenly she was posting professional-looking photos at expensive restaurants, designer handbags artfully arranged on marble countertops, and vacation shots from places I knew she couldn't afford. At first, I figured Mom and Dad were just being extra generous, maybe helping her celebrate some milestone I'd missed. But when she posted a series of photos from a weekend in Napa Valley, complete with wine tastings and 5-star hotel room shots, I started doing some math. That weekend would have cost at least $2,000 for someone with no income. I started paying closer attention to her social media presence, and what I found was a carefully constructed fantasy. Every post was designed to project success, wealth, and the kind of effortless lifestyle that influencers use to sell products to people who want to believe that kind of life is possible. The problem was, none of it was real. Her 50,000 followers, I ran them through one of those authenticity checkers that my real estate marketing team uses, and 30,000 of them were fake accounts. Purchased followers from some overseas company that specializes in making people look more popular than they actually are. Her engagement rates were terrible. Posts that should have gotten thousands of likes from a real 50,000-person audience were getting maybe 300, mostly from the same 20 accounts over and over again. But the most disturbing discovery came when I started recognizing some of the items in her photos. That designer handbag she'd posed with at some trendy brunch spot, I'd seen it before. In my closet. It was the Prada bag I'd bought myself last year to celebrate closing on a particularly difficult sale. She'd borrowed it for a family wedding 6 months ago and never returned it. The delicate gold necklace she wore in her lifestyle content, also mine. A gift I'd bought myself for my birthday. The expensive sunglasses that appeared in multiple posts. You guessed it. My sister wasn't just creating a fake lifestyle online, she was literally stealing pieces of my real life to do it. But the borrowing was just the tip of the iceberg. Through some careful social media investigation, I discovered that Bella had been dating Tyler Rodriguez for 8 months. Tyler's a 29-year-old personal trainer whose family owns a small gym in Midtown Sacramento. He's one of those genuinely nice guys who works hard, saves money, and believes in building something real. From what I could piece together through their posts and mutual friends, Tyler had no idea he was dating someone whose lifestyle was completely subsidized by her parents. Bella had somehow convinced him that her influencer career was actually profitable, that her constant shopping and expensive taste were funded by brand partnerships and sponsored content. The truth was uglier than I'd imagined. Last Tuesday, I ran into Tyler at the coffee shop near my office. We'd met a few times at family gatherings, and he seemed like a decent guy who genuinely cared about my sister. But when we started talking, I could see the confusion and concern in his eyes. He mentioned that Bella had been asking to borrow money lately, small amounts at first, but increasingly larger sums. She'd convinced him that she was waiting for a big sponsorship deal to come through, that she just needed to bridge the gap for a few weeks. He'd loaned her $3,000 over the past 2 months, but what really worried him was her spending. Even when she claimed to be broke, she'd show up with new clothes, expensive makeup, or suggest dinner at places that cost more than his monthly car payment. I didn't have the heart to tell him the truth about where her money actually came from, but I could see he was starting to figure it out on his own. The worst part wasn't just the manipulation, though. It was watching someone who actually worked for his money get taken advantage of by someone who'd never had to earn $1 in her life. Tyler represents everything Bella could be if she actually tried hard-working, honest building something real instead of projecting an image. But instead of learning from him, she was using him as another prop in her artificial lifestyle. That night, I sat in my kitchen looking at my credit card statement, realizing that several expensive purchases I didn't remember making. When I called the company, they confirmed that my card had been used at places I'd never been for amounts that made my stomach drop. Someone had been using my information to fund their lifestyle, and I had a pretty good idea who. I'd been supporting my sister's fake influencer career without even knowing it, and the betrayal felt like a physical weight in my chest. This wasn't just about borrowed jewelry anymore. This was theft. As I stared at the charges on my statement, I realized that Bella hadn't just stolen my belongings and my credit card information. She'd stolen my trust, my sense of family security, and my belief that blood relations meant something sacred. But more than anything, she'd stolen my patience, and I was about to find out just how much that was going to cost all of us. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in March. I was getting ready for work, rushing through my morning routine in the master bathroom of my beautiful craftsman house, when I heard it. A sound like the world splitting open, starting somewhere deep beneath my feet and traveling up through the walls. I froze toothbrush halfway to my mouth, listening to the silence that followed. Then I heard it again. A groaning, settling noise that made my stomach drop. By the time I got outside to investigate, I could see the problem clearly. A jagged crack had opened up along the foundation on the east side of my house, running nearly 10 feet from the corner to the front porch. The Sacramento clay soil, which expands and contracts with the seasons, has finally won its battle against my 20-year-old foundation. I called 3 contractors that day, and every single one gave me the same number: $15,000, minimum. The Sacramento real estate market had been booming since I bought the house in 2019, with property values shooting up 25% thanks to Bay Area tech workers moving inland for more space and lower costs. My house was worth more than ever, but that didn't change the fact that I was looking at wiping out most of my emergency fund to keep it from literally falling apart. I spent that entire week getting second and third opinions, hoping someone would tell me it was a simple fix, something I could patch with a weekend project and some YouTube tutorials. But every contractor who walked around my property shook their heads and gave me the same reality check. Foundation repair in Sacramento isn't optional. It's survival. By June, I thought the worst was behind me. The foundation was solid, the contractors had left, and I was starting to rebuild my savings account with the commission checks from a particularly good month of sales. Then the heat wave hit. California summers are no joke, but that June was different. Temperatures soared past 110 degrees for 6 straight days, breaking records that had stood since the 1980s. My 1960s-era air conditioning system, which had been limping along for years, finally gave up completely on day 4. I came home from showing houses to clients all day to find my beautiful hardwood floors warping from the heat, the thermostat reading 96 degrees inside, and a note from my HVAC technician explaining that my entire system needed to be replaced. Not repaired, replaced. $8,000. I sat on my living room floor that night directly under the ceiling fan that was doing absolutely nothing to cut through the oppressive heat and cried for the first time in years. Not just because of the money, though, that was devastating enough, but because I was starting to realize that owning this house might have been the biggest financial mistake of my life. Sarah Kim, my financial advisor and college roommate from Northwestern, drove over the next morning with iced coffee and a reality check. Sarah's one of those friends who tells you what you need to hear instead of what you want to hear, which is exactly why I called her when I felt like my life was falling apart. We sat in my sweltering kitchen while she ran numbers on her laptop, calculating the impact of these unexpected expenses on my long-term financial health. The foundation repair had already depleted 60% of my emergency fund. The HVAC replacement would finish it off completely, leaving me vulnerable to any other surprises my 20-year-old house decided to throw at me. But Sarah wasn't done with the bad news. Your electrical system is from the Kennedy administration, Madison. When was the last time you had it inspected? I couldn't remember which turned out to be a problem. She insisted I call an electrician immediately, just to make sure we weren't looking at any safety issues while I was dealing with everything else. The electrician arrived the next day, a weathered guy named Frank, who'd been working Sacramento homes for 30 years. He spent 2 hours crawling around my basement and attic testing outlets and examining the main panel. When he came back upstairs, his expression told me everything I needed to know before he opened his mouth. "Miss Chen, I need to be straight with you. This electrical system is a fire hazard. The wiring in your walls is older than I am, and half these outlets aren't even grounded properly. You need a complete rewiring job, and you need it soon. $5,000. Another $5,000 I didn't have. I asked Frank how soon I needed to make this decision, hoping he'd give me some time to figure out how to finance yet another major expense. He pointed to a section of wall near my kitchen where the paint had started to bubble and discolor. "See that? That's heat damage from overloaded circuits. This isn't a someday problem, miss. This is a problem right now." That night I called Sarah back and told her about the electrical situation. She was quiet for a long time after I finished explaining everything. "Madison, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Do you own this house, or does this house own you?" I knew what she was getting at, but I wasn't ready to hear it. This house represented everything I'd worked for since I was 12 years old, selling lemonade to buy my own books. It was proof that a girl from a middle-class immigrant family could build something beautiful and substantial in America. But Sarah wasn't finished. The Sacramento market is at an all-time high right now. Houses in your neighborhood are selling for 20 to 30% more than they were worth 2 years ago. You could walk away from this with a significant profit and buy something more manageable. I spent the next week researching comparable sales in my area, and Sarah was right. My house, which I'd bought for $750,000 in 2019, was now worth at least $920,000. Even after paying off my mortgage and covering selling costs, I'd walk away with over $170,000 in profit. But the idea of giving up my dream house felt like admitting defeat. I'd fought so hard to get here, saved every penny, worked weekends and evenings for years to afford this place. How could I just walk away? The answer came to me during a sleepless night in late September, lying in my overheated bedroom with my laptop researching the cost of homeowners insurance in California. I wasn't just looking at $28,000 in immediate repairs. I was looking at the ongoing reality of maintaining the house in a climate that was getting hotter and more extreme every year. The foundation would need attention again. The roof would eventually fail. The plumbing was probably not far behind the electrical system. I was 20 years away from retirement, and instead of building wealth, I was about to spend the next decade feeding money into a beautiful, expensive pit. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. But first, I had to deal with my sister. Bella had been unusually interested in my house lately, stopping by unannounced with her phone in hand, taking photos and videos of different rooms. At first, I thought she was just being sisterly, maybe planning some kind of surprise or showing off my success to her friends. Then I started noticing things missing. Small things at first. A decorative bowl I'd bought at a local artisan market disappeared from my coffee table. A framed photo from my college graduation vanished from the hallway. When I asked Bella about them during one of her visits, she claimed she hadn't seen them. But I'd started checking her Instagram more carefully, and there they were. My decorative bowl artfully arranged with fresh fruit as a backdrop for one of her lifestyle posts. My college photo cropped to remove me entirely used as a prop in a post about the importance of education and family support. She wasn't just borrowing my things anymore. She was taking them, using them for her fake influencer content, and then disposing of them when she was done. But the real wake-up call came when she showed up at my door on a Saturday morning with a measuring tape. I was in my garden trying to salvage some of my plants after the brutal heat wave when I heard her letting herself in through the front door. We'd always had an open door policy in our family, but something about the way she moved through my house that morning felt different. When I came inside, I found her in my guest bedroom measuring the walls and taking notes on her phone. "Bella, what are you doing?" She looked up with that bright, innocent smile she'd perfected as a child, the one that used to get her out of trouble with our parents. "Oh, I'm just getting some ideas for room layouts. You know, for inspiration." "Inspiration for what?" She waved her hand vaguely, still focused on her measurements. "Just some content I'm working on. Room design ideas, that kind of thing." I watched her measure the window dimensions and photograph the corner where natural light was best, and something cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't about inspiration or content ideas. This felt like reconnaissance. When she moved into my living room and started measuring the space between my couch and the television, I'd had enough. "Bella, why are you measuring my furniture?" She finally looked at me directly, and for just a moment, I saw something calculating in her expression before the innocent smile returned. "I was just thinking about how great this space would be for filming. You know, if someone wanted to create content here, the lighting is perfect, and you have such good taste in decorating." The way she said someone made it clear she wasn't talking about me. That's when I realized what was happening. Bella wasn't just stealing my belongings for her Instagram posts, she was planning to take over my entire house. The measuring tape, the photos, the sudden interest in my living space. She was mapping out how to transform my home into her personal content studio. And based on her confidence level, I was pretty sure she thought I was going to let her do it. I watched my sister photograph my kitchen counter, making notes about camera angles and lighting, and realized that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing me as a person with my own life and boundaries. I'd become nothing more than a resource to be utilized, a successful sister whose achievements were there for her convenience. But what scared me most was the growing certainty that she wasn't acting alone in this plan. The way she moved through my house with such confidence, the casual way she assumed access to my space, the complete lack of concern about asking permission first. This felt coordinated, like she'd already gotten approval from someone else. I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who that someone else was, and I was about to find out just how far my family was willing to go to solve Bella's problems at my expense. The decision to sell my house came to me at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in January, sitting at my kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of contractor estimates. I'd been staring at the numbers for hours, trying to find some mathematical miracle that would make keeping the house make sense. $28,000 in immediate repairs, an uncertain future filled with more expensive surprises, a retirement account that wouldn't recover from this financial hit for years. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the growing realization that I'd become a prisoner in my own home, watching my sister circle like a vulture, waiting for the right moment to move in and take over the life I'd built. I picked up my phone and texted David Wu, my mentor at Keller Williams. David's been selling real estate in Sacramento for 20 years, and he's the kind of agent other agents call when they need advice about their own properties. David, I need to ask you something privately. Can you give me a realistic assessment of what my house would sell for in today's market? He responded within minutes, even at that ridiculous hour. Madison, are you thinking about selling? We should talk in person. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning? The next day, I sat across from David at a small cafe near the Capitol, watching him review photos of my house on his tablet. He'd done the initial market analysis for me when I bought the place in 2019, so he knew the property well. Based on recent comparable sales in your neighborhood, I'd list this at $920,000, maybe $950 if we get the right buyer. These craftsman houses in the fabulous 40s are selling fast, especially to tech workers coming from the Bay Area. The numbers hit me like cold water. Even after paying off my remaining mortgage balance, selling costs, and agent commissions, I'd walk away with over $170,000 in profit. David leaned forward, lowering his voice. Madison, this is off the record, but if you're thinking about downsizing, now is the time. The market's at peak levels, and honestly, I don't see it staying this hot much longer. Interest rates are starting to climb, and buyers are getting more cautious. I spent the rest of that week secretly house hunting, looking at condos and smaller homes that would give me the financial freedom I'd lost. Downtown Sacramento had several new developments aimed at young professionals' places with modern amenities and low maintenance costs. The condo that caught my attention was in a converted historic building on J Street, walking distance from my office. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small balcony overlooking the city, and most importantly, everything was new. New electrical, new plumbing, new HVAC. No nasty surprises waiting in 20-year-old walls. $485,000. I could pay cash and still have enough left over to rebuild my emergency fund and increase my retirement contributions. But making the decision was one thing. Living with it was something else entirely. I spent the next 2 weeks walking through my house like I was saying goodbye to an old friend. Every room held memories of the person I'd become since buying this place. The kitchen where I'd taught myself to cook real meals instead of surviving on takeout. The office where I'd built my real estate business. The garden where I'd learned that I actually enjoyed working with my hands. This house had been more than shelter. It had been proof that a girl from an immigrant family could create something beautiful and substantial in America. But it had also become a burden that was stealing my financial future and attracting the wrong kind of attention from people who saw my success as their opportunity. I called Sarah Kim on a Friday evening, sitting on my front porch and watching the sunset paint my neighborhood in golden light. Sarah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to sell. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her moving around her kitchen, probably making dinner for her family. Madison, I know this is hard, but I think you're making the smart choice. Sometimes the biggest risk is holding on to something just because it feels safe. We talked for an hour about the practical details, how to time the sale to minimize tax implications, whether to reinvest the profits or pay down other debts, how to handle the emotional side of walking away from a dream. But the conversation I was dreading was the one I'd have to have with my family. How do you tell people who've watched you work for years to achieve something that you're voluntarily giving it up? The answer I realized was that I didn't have to tell them anything until it was already done. My family had gotten used to making decisions about my life without consulting me. Maybe it was time for me to return the favor. David Wu had warned me that selling a house like mine wouldn't take long in the current market, but even I was surprised by how quickly things moved once we listed it. We put it on the market on a Wednesday morning with professional photos that showcased every beautiful detail I'd spent 3 years perfecting. By Thursday afternoon, we had 12 showing requests and 3 serious inquiries. The young couple who bought it were exactly what I'd expected. Jason and Maya Chen, both software engineers, who'd been living in a cramped San Francisco apartment working remotely since the pandemic started. They had the kind of budget that made Sacramento real estate agents very happy, and they fell in love with my house the moment they walked through the front door. I watched them examine every room with the same excitement I'd felt when I first saw the place. Maya ran her hands along the original hardwood floors, and Jason tested every light switch and outlet like he couldn't believe his luck at finding a house with character that had been properly maintained. They made an offer that same evening, $925,000 cash with a 30-day closing and a 60-day rent-back option so I could find my new place without rushing. I signed the papers in David's office, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. The weight of financial stress that had been sitting on my chest since March finally lifted, but the relief was complicated by grief. Signing those papers meant acknowledging that this chapter of my life was ending whether I was ready or not. While the lawyers handled the legal details, I started the process of finding my next home. The downtown condo I'd been watching was still available, and when I toured it for the second time, I could finally imagine myself living there. The space was smaller, but it was exactly what I needed. Clean lines, modern systems, minimal maintenance. A place where I could focus on building wealth instead of constantly fixing problems. I put in an offer that afternoon contingent on the sale of my current house closing on schedule. But the hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the logistics. It was keeping this enormous secret from my family while continuing to show up for our weekly Sunday dinners and pretend that nothing had changed. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. When Dad asked about my work, I had to be careful not to mention anything about my own real estate transaction. When Mom complained about money being tight because of their ongoing support for Bella, I bit my tongue instead of pointing out that I was about to solve all of my financial problems, while they continued enabling my sister's fantasy lifestyle. And when Bella stopped by unannounced, which was happening more frequently, I had to act normal while she continued her reconnaissance mission measuring rooms and taking photos for whatever plan she was developing. The worst part was watching her grow more confident about whatever she thought was going to happen. She'd started referring to my house in conversations with our parents as if she already had some claim to it. During one particularly uncomfortable Sunday dinner, she mentioned needing more space for her content creation, and Mom immediately suggested that I had plenty of extra room that wasn't being used efficiently. "It's such a waste for Madison to have that big house all to herself," Mom said, serving Bella an extra helping of her favorite dumplings. "There's so much space that could be put to better use." I sat there eating my dinner and nodding politely, while my family planned my life without bothering to ask what I wanted. But this time, instead of feeling frustrated or powerless, I felt something else entirely. I felt like I was holding the ace of spades in a poker game where everyone else thought they knew what cards I had. The closing on my house was scheduled for the first week of February. The condo purchase would happen 2 weeks later. By the end of the month, I'd be living in a completely different place with a completely different financial situation. And my family had no idea any of it was happening. I started making lists of what I wanted to keep, what I wanted to sell, and what I wanted to donate. 3 years' worth of accumulation that needed to be sorted and packed without anyone noticing that I was preparing to move. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been the responsible daughter, the one who made careful plans and consulted everyone before making major decisions. But my family's assumption that my success belonged to them had taught me something valuable about the difference between being responsible to people and being responsible for them. I was about to find out whether they understood that distinction. But first, I had to get through 1 more month of family dinners, casual visits from Bella, and conversations about my future that didn't include me as an actual participant. The hardest part was watching Tyler during the few times he joined us for family gatherings. I could see the confusion and concern growing in his eyes as he spent more time around our family dynamics. He was starting to understand that something wasn't quite right about Bella's relationship with money and responsibility, but he hadn't put all the pieces together yet. Last Sunday, he pulled me aside after dinner and asked if I had a few minutes to talk privately. "Madison, can I ask you something about Bella? I'm getting mixed signals about some things, and I value your opinion." I wanted to warn him about what he was getting involved with, but I also knew that some lessons can only be learned through experience. Instead, I gave him the most honest advice I could. Tyler. My sister is 28 years old, and she's never had to support herself financially. Draw your own conclusions about what that means for your relationship. He nodded slowly, like he'd already suspected as much, but needed to hear it confirmed. That conversation reminded me that the consequences of my family's enabling weren't limited to our immediate family. Tyler was a good guy who worked hard and saved money, and he was about to learn the expensive lesson that comes from getting involved with someone who's never learned the value of a dollar. But I couldn't save him from that experience any more than I could save my parents from the consequences of their parenting choices. All I could do was protect myself and hope that the fallout from my decision would teach everyone involved something useful about boundaries, responsibility, and the difference between helping someone and enabling them. The closing papers were signed, the keys were handed over, and the money was sitting in my bank account. In 3 weeks, when my family was expecting me to be the same reliable, accommodating daughter I'd always been, I was going to serve them a reality check that would change everything. I just had to make it through one more Sunday dinner first. I should have known something was brewing when I saw Mom cleaning the house on a Wednesday. Linda Chen is not a Wednesday deep cleaning person. She's a Saturday morning routine cleaner, very methodical about her schedule. But when I drove past my parents' house on my way to show a property that afternoon, I could see her through the front window dusting furniture that hadn't seen a dust cloth since Christmas. The next morning, Dad called me at work with an unusual request. "Madison, are you free for dinner Sunday? Your mother wants to make something special." Something special in our family usually meant one of two things. Someone was celebrating something significant, or someone was about to deliver news that required extra maternal comfort food to soften the blow. Since no one had mentioned any celebrations lately, I was betting on the second option. I spent the rest of the week wondering what crisis Bella had gotten herself into this time. Maybe she'd finally maxed out all her credit cards. Maybe Tyler had discovered the extent of her financial dependence and broken up with her. Maybe she'd gotten into some kind of legal trouble with her fake influencer schemes. What I didn't expect was to walk into a full-scale family intervention designed around my life. Friday afternoon, Mrs. Liu caught me checking my mail and waved me over to her front garden. Dorothy Liu has lived next door to my parents for 15 years, and she's the kind of neighbor who notices everything but only speaks up when she thinks you need to know something important. "Madison, dear, I don't want to pry, but I've been seeing a lot of activity around your house lately. Moving trucks, real estate people coming and going. I hope everything is all right." My heart stopped. I'd been so careful about scheduling showings and inspections when I knew the neighbors wouldn't be around, but apparently I hadn't been careful enough. "Oh, that's nothing serious, Mrs. Liu. Just some routine maintenance work." She gave me the kind of look that 68 years of life experience had taught her to give when someone was obviously not telling the whole truth. "Well, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." And Madison. Sometimes the biggest changes in our lives happen when we least expect them, but that doesn't mean they're not the right changes. I spent that evening wondering how much Mrs. Liu had seen and whether she'd mentioned anything to other neighbors. Our neighborhood had an active gossip network that rivaled any social media platform for speed and accuracy. The next day brought more evidence that something unusual was happening in my family's communication channels. Jessica Chen Martinez, my successful cousin who worked as a marketing director for a tech company in Roseville, called me Saturday morning with what seemed like casual conversation but felt like reconnaissance. "Madison, I heard through the family network that real estate is really hot in your neighborhood right now. Are you thinking about taking advantage of that market? I'd always liked Jessica. She was 3 years younger than me but had managed to build a successful career while maintaining a happy marriage and raising 2 kids. She represented everything our parents wished their daughters could achieve: professional success, balanced with traditional family values. But the timing of her question felt suspicious. "No immediate plans, Jessica." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just curious. You know how family gossip works. Someone mentioned seeing activity around your place, and you know how stories grow. Someone had definitely been talking, and the information was making its way through our extended family network faster than I'd anticipated." After I hung up with Jessica, I realized I needed to accelerate my timeline. If people were already noticing changes and asking questions, it wouldn't be long before my parents heard rumors that could complicate whatever announcement they were planning. Saturday afternoon, I drove by my house one more time to make sure everything looked normal from the street. The new owners weren't scheduled to take possession until Tuesday, but I wanted to ensure there were no obvious signs of transition that could reach my family before Sunday dinner. The house looked exactly as I'd left it, beautiful and well-maintained, showing no evidence of the life-changing transaction that had already taken place behind the scenes. But something felt different about the way my parents acted when I called Saturday evening to confirm Sunday dinner plans. Mom answered the phone with an unusually cheerful voice, the kind of forced brightness that meant she was either planning something or hiding something. "Madison, we're so excited to see you tomorrow. I'm making all your favorite dishes, and I picked up that wine you like from the shop downtown." She was making all my favorite dishes. Orange chicken with her special sauce, steamed rice with the perfect texture, those little pork dumplings I'd loved since childhood, and green beans stir-fried with garlic the way she'd learned from her mother. This wasn't just dinner. This was a full comfort food assault designed to soften me up for whatever they were planning. Dad got on the phone briefly to ask about my work week, but his questions felt scripted, like he was reading from a list of conversation topics he'd prepared in advance. "How's the real estate market treating you these days, Madison? Still keeping busy with those high-end properties?" Even his tone was wrong. Dad never asked about my work in vague terms. He usually wanted specific details about deals I was working on, challenges I was facing, strategies I was using to build my client base. This felt like small talk designed to avoid more substantial conversation. Even Bella's text messages had a different tone throughout the week. Instead of her usual complaints about being broke or bored, she'd sent several messages asking about my schedule and whether I had any big plans coming up. The pieces weren't adding up to anything good, but I couldn't quite figure out what kind of family drama I was walking into. By Saturday evening, I'd convinced myself that whatever was happening probably involved some kind of financial crisis that required family problem solving. Maybe Dad's retirement accounts had taken a bigger hit than they'd admitted. Maybe Mom's part-time bookkeeping work wasn't bringing in enough to cover their ongoing support of Bella. Maybe they were finally ready to have an honest conversation about the unsustainable nature of funding my sister's lifestyle indefinitely. What I couldn't have predicted was that their solution would involve redistributing my resources rather than addressing the root cause of their financial stress. Sunday morning, I stood in my soon-to-be former kitchen drinking coffee and looking at the boxes I'd started packing in my bedroom closet. In 48 hours, the new owners would have keys to this house, and I'd be sleeping in a downtown condo that my family didn't know existed. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. I was about to attend a family dinner where my relatives planned to solve their problems by accessing my house, while I was secretly in the process of making that house unavailable to anyone, including myself. But first, I had to get through whatever intervention my family had orchestrated. I drove to my parents' house with a bottle of good wine and the kind of nervous energy that comes from knowing you're about to walk into a situation you can't predict or control. The moment I pulled into their driveway, I could see that this wasn't going to be a typical Sunday dinner. Dad had pressure-washed the front walkway, something he usually only did before major holidays or when important guests were coming. Mom's garden looked freshly weeded, and someone had even cleaned the windows. They were staging this conversation like a theatrical performance. I arrived at my parents' house exactly on time, carrying a bottle of wine and trying to look like someone who had no major secrets or life changes happening behind the scenes. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew my suspicions were correct. The house smelled like a holiday feast, and I could see Mom's good china set out in the dining room. She'd even lit candles, something she usually only did for special occasions or when we had company. Dad hugged me with the kind of enthusiasm that meant he was nervous about something, and Mom couldn't stop smiling as she fussed around the kitchen, putting finishing touches on dishes I recognized as childhood comfort foods, designed to make me feel loved and agreeable. Bella was already there, dressed more carefully than usual, in a flowing blouse and dark jeans that actually looked clean and unwrinkled. She was sitting at the kitchen counter with her phone in her hands, filming what looked like a casual family gathering for her social media accounts. But her energy felt different too, excited in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. She kept glancing at Mom and Dad like they were all sharing some wonderful secret that I wasn't part of yet. The conversation during dinner preparation stayed safely in neutral territory. Dad talked about his latest project in the garage, some kind of workbench he was building from scratch, using plans he'd found online. Mom updated me on news from various aunts and uncles, the kind of family gossip that usually bored me, but felt oddly comforting today. Bella chattered about some online course she was supposedly taking about digital marketing and personal branding, dropping buzzwords about engagement rates and content strategy that sounded impressive but meant nothing concrete. But I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation, like everyone was waiting for some predetermined moment to shift into whatever this evening was really about. When we finally sat down to eat, Dad opened a bottle of champagne that I'd never seen before, something clearly more expensive than his usual wine selections. The label was in French, and I could see gold foil around the neck that indicated this wasn't a grocery store purchase. "This seems pretty fancy for a regular Sunday dinner," I said, accepting a glass and trying to keep my voice light. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that confirmed my growing certainty that this was not going to be a regular family dinner. It was the kind of look married couples develop after decades together, full of communication that doesn't require words. "Well," Dad said, raising his glass slightly, "we thought it might be nice to celebrate some family problem-solving." Problem-solving was Dad's corporate way of describing conversations about sensitive topics, a habit left over from his decades in engineering management at Boeing. He approached family conflicts the same way he'd approached technical challenges at work: identify the problem, analyze potential solutions, implement the most efficient option. Bella couldn't contain her excitement any longer. She practically bounced in her chair as she spoke, her words coming out in a rush of enthusiasm. "Madison, we've been talking as a family about some changes that could benefit everyone, and we think we've come up with the perfect solution." I set down my champagne glass and looked around the table at three faces that were watching me with barely contained anticipation. The perfect solution to what problem exactly? Mom jumped in with her most diplomatic tone, the one she used when she was about to ask for something she wasn't sure I'd agree to. "Well, sweetheart, we've been looking at the financial situation with your father's retirement and everything we've been helping Bella with, and we realized that there are some adjustments we all need to make." The phrase "adjustments we all need to make" sent a chill down my spine. In my family's communication style, that usually meant adjustments I needed to make while everyone else continued doing exactly what they'd been doing. Adjustments that involve me. Somehow Dad set down his champagne glass and shifted into his formal presentation mode, the voice he'd probably used in countless Boeing meetings when proposing solutions to complex engineering problems. "Madison, we've been proud of your success and your independence, but we think there might be ways for our family resources to be used more efficiently. Ways that could help everyone achieve their goals while strengthening our family bonds." I was starting to get a very clear picture of where this conversation was heading, but I wanted to hear them say it out loud. I wanted to understand exactly how they'd rationalized whatever they were about to propose. What kind of resource efficiency are we talking about? Bella couldn't wait for the careful build-up anymore. Her excitement overrode whatever script they'd planned, and the words tumbled out of her mouth like she'd been holding them back for hours. "Madison, what if I moved in with you? Just temporarily, until I get my influencer career really established and start generating consistent income. It would solve so many problems for everyone." The room went quiet, except for the sound of my heart beating in my ears. I looked around the table at 3 expectant faces, all waiting for my response to a plan they'd clearly spent considerable time developing without bothering to ask what I thought about it. Mom leaned forward with her most encouraging smile, the one she'd used when I was a child, and she wanted me to try something I wasn't sure about. Think about it, Madison. You have that beautiful house with all that extra space, and Bella needs a stable environment where she can focus on building her business. It would be perfect for both of you. Dad nodded approvingly, clearly pleased with how smoothly the presentation was going. From a practical standpoint, it makes complete sense. Bella could contribute to household expenses and help with maintenance, and you'd have company instead of rattling around in that big place by yourself. Bella was practically glowing with excitement as she outlined her vision for our shared future. And Madison, I could help you with social media for your real estate business. We could create content together, show people what successful women look like when they support each other. It would be amazing for both our brands. She pulled out her phone and started showing me screenshots of Instagram accounts that featured sister collaborations, lifestyle content about family support, and before and after posts about shared living spaces transformed into creative studios. I sat there listening to them describe how they'd solved my life without consulting me, feeling something cold and heavy settle in my stomach. But what struck me most wasn't their presumption or their complete disregard for my preferences. It was the casual way they talked about my house, my space, my carefully built independence as if it were communal property, available for redistribution whenever the family needed it. This wasn't a conversation. It was an announcement disguised as a family discussion. I took a sip of champagne and looked around the table at these people I loved, who apparently saw my success as a resource to be managed rather than an achievement to be respected. "That's certainly an interesting proposal," I said carefully. "When were you thinking this arrangement would start?" Bella clapped her hands together like I'd already agreed, her face lighting up with the kind of joy I hadn't seen from her in years. "Well, I've already given notice to my current living situation, so I was hoping we could start moving my things next weekend. I've been planning this for weeks, getting everything organized so the transition would be smooth for both of us. Planning for weeks, without asking me." Dad raised his glass again, clearly considering the matter settled. "To family solutions that benefit everyone." Mom smiled and started talking about logistics, about which bedroom Bella would use and how they could help with the moving process, and whether I needed any help preparing the house for a new roommate. She mentioned buying new bedding for the guest room, setting up a workspace area where Bella could film her content, and maybe converting part of the garage into storage space for all of Bella's belongings. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about the boxes hidden in my bedroom closet, the keys I'd be handing over to new owners in 48 hours, and the champagne we were drinking to celebrate a plan that was about to become impossible in ways my family couldn't imagine. I raised my glass and smiled, feeling like I was holding the most powerful secret of my entire life. To family solutions, I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Because in 48 hours we were all going to learn what problem-solving really looked like. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of excited planning and enthusiastic conversation about how wonderful this arrangement was going to be for everyone involved. Mom talked about how nice it would be to have both her daughters supporting each other, living in the same neighborhood, available for regular family dinners and holiday celebrations. Dad discussed the financial benefits, how sharing expenses would help both Bella and me save money while providing security and companionship for both of his daughters. Bella pulled up Pinterest boards she'd apparently been creating for weeks, showing me room layouts and decorating ideas that would transform my carefully curated home into some kind of lifestyle content creation studio. I nodded and smiled and asked appropriate questions while internally counting down the hours until Tuesday morning when the new owners would arrive to take possession of the house that my family was so enthusiastically planning to redistribute. The evening ended with hugs and excitement and promises to start making concrete plans for Bella's move, which was apparently happening whether I agreed to it or not. I drove home through the quiet Sacramento streets past the familiar landmarks of my neighborhood, knowing that this was one of the last times I'd make this drive as a resident rather than a visitor. In my driveway, I sat in my car for a few minutes, looking at the house that had represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd achieved, everything I'd built through years of discipline and sacrifice. Tomorrow night, I'll be sleeping here for the last time. Tuesday morning, I'd hand over the keys to people who'd paid fair market value for the privilege of calling this place home. And sometime very soon after that, I'd be having a very different kind of family dinner conversation, one where I'd finally get to deliver some problem-solving solutions of my own. The following Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp February weather that makes Sacramento feel like the perfect place to live. I woke up in my downtown condo, made coffee in my new kitchen, and looked out at the city skyline while mentally preparing for the performance of my lifetime. I'd been living in my new place for 5 days, and my family still had no idea that my old house now belonged to Jason and Maya Chen, who were probably spending their first weekend organizing their home office and planning their garden. The boxes were unpacked, my furniture fit perfectly in the smaller space, and I'd never felt more financially secure in my adult life. But none of that mattered today, because I was about to walk into another family dinner where my parents and sister would continue planning my life around an asset I no longer owned. I arrived at my parents' house carrying the same bottle of wine I always brought, dressed in the same casual Sunday outfit I'd worn dozens of times before. Nothing about my appearance suggested that my entire life had changed in the past week. Mom answered the door with an expression of barely contained excitement, the kind of look she'd worn when I was a child, and she was planning surprise birthday parties. Madison, perfect timing. I just took the orange chicken out of the oven and your father opened that bottle of wine you brought last week, the same expensive champagne from our previous family meeting. Apparently they had more than one bottle, which meant they'd been planning this announcement for longer than I'd realized. Bella was already in the kitchen when I walked in, but something was different about her energy today. Last week she'd been excited and hopeful like someone anticipating good news. Today she seemed confident and settled like someone whose plans were already in motion. She looked up from her phone with a smile that reminded me of a cat who'd just spotted a very promising mouse. Madison. I'm so glad you're here. I've been working on some content ideas for our new living situation, and I can't wait to show you what I've been planning. She'd moved past the proposal stage entirely. In her mind, we were already roommates, and she was ready to start implementing her vision for our shared lifestyle. Dad appeared from the living room carrying the good champagne glasses, the crystal ones that only came out for major celebrations or important announcements. "There's my successful daughter," he said, giving me a hug that felt slightly different than usual. Warmer, maybe, or more appreciative, like he was grateful for something I'd done without realizing it. The table was set with Mom's best dishes again, and I could smell all the comfort foods I'd grown up loving. Orange chicken, fried rice, steamed vegetables, and those little pork dumplings that took her hours to make from scratch. This was definitely not a casual family dinner. We sat down to eat, and the conversation started exactly where it had ended the previous week. Mom asked about my work schedule and whether I'd had time to think about preparing the guest room for Bella's arrival. "I've been looking at some furniture online," Mom said, passing me the serving spoon for the rice. "Nothing too expensive, just some basics to make sure Bella has everything she needs to be comfortable and productive." Dad nodded approvingly while cutting his chicken into precise, even pieces. "We want to make sure this transition is as smooth as possible for both of you girls. Families should support each other, especially when it benefits everyone involved." Bella couldn't contain herself any longer. She set down her fork and clasped her hands together like she was about to deliver wonderful news. "Madison, I have to tell you how excited I am about this. I've been researching content creation strategies, and I think we could build something really special together. Something that showcases successful women supporting each other and building each other up." She pulled out her phone and started swiping through what looked like a detailed presentation she'd prepared. "Look, I've been studying other sister collaboration accounts, and they're getting incredible engagement. Lifestyle content, home design, career advice, family dynamics. We could tap into all of these niches while building our personal brands." I watched her scroll through screenshots of Instagram accounts, Pinterest boards, and what appeared to be a business plan for our future content partnership. And the best part is, your house is perfect for this kind of content. The lighting in the living room is amazing for filming. The kitchen has that great natural light for lifestyle shots, and the guest room would make an incredible studio space. She'd moved completely past asking for my permission and into planning our shared business venture. Dad raised his champagne glass with the satisfied expression of someone whose problem-solving approach had worked exactly as planned, to new beginnings and family partnerships. Mom lifted her glass with tears in her eyes, clearly emotional about her daughters finally working together toward common goals. "I'm so proud of both of you for being willing to try something new. This is exactly what family means, supporting each other and building each other up." Bella was practically vibrating with excitement as she raised her glass. "To the Chen sister brand and everything we're going to build together." I looked around the table at 3 expectant faces, all waiting for me to join their toast to a future that had been planned without my input and would be impossible to implement for reasons they couldn't imagine. I picked up my champagne glass and smiled at each of them in turn. "This is really something," I said, keeping my voice light and conversational. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this plan." Bella beamed at what she interpreted as approval. "I've been working on it for weeks. I wanted to make sure I had everything organized so we could hit the ground running. I've already started telling my followers about the exciting changes coming to my content, and the response has been incredible." She'd been promoting our collaboration to her fake followers without asking me first. "That's quite an ambitious timeline," I said, taking a sip of champagne. "When exactly were you planning to start moving your things?" Bella exchanged a quick glance with our parents before answering. "Well, I was hoping we could start this coming weekend. I've already packed most of my stuff, and Tyler said he could help with the heavy lifting. I figured we could spend next week getting everything set up, and then we could start creating content together right away." She'd already packed her belongings and recruited her boyfriend to help with a move that I'd never agreed to. Mom leaned forward with her most encouraging expression. "We thought it would be nice to make it a family project. Your father and I could help with the decorating, maybe contribute some furniture and household items to make sure you both have everything you need." They were planning to redecorate my house without asking what I wanted or needed. Dad nodded enthusiastically. "I've been looking forward to having a project that involves both my daughters. It's been too long since we've all worked together on something meaningful." I sat there listening to them describe their detailed plans for reorganizing my life, and I realized that in their minds this conversation was a formality. They weren't asking for my permission. They were informing me of decisions that had already been made. The presumption was breathtaking, but it wasn't surprising. This was exactly how my family had always operated. They identified a problem, developed a solution that required my resources or cooperation, and then presented it to me as a done deal disguised as a family discussion. But this time they'd made their plans around an asset that no longer existed. I set down my champagne glass and looked directly at Bella, who was still scrolling through her content strategy presentation. "Bella, can I ask you something?" She looked up with bright, attentive eyes. "Of course. What do you want to know?" "When you've been planning all this content creation and telling your followers about our collaboration, what exactly have you been telling them?" Her smile faltered slightly, like she sensed a shift in the conversation, but couldn't identify the source. "Just that I'm moving in with my successful sister, and we're going to be creating content together about family support and women building each other up." "Why?" "So you've already announced this publicly, even though we'd never discussed it privately?" The excitement in her expression was slowly being replaced by confusion and the first hint of defensiveness. "I didn't announce anything specific. I just hinted that some exciting changes were coming and that my content was going to evolve in new directions." "But you gave your followers the impression that I'd agreed to be part of your content strategy." Mom jumped in before Bella could answer, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when she thought someone was being unnecessarily difficult. "Madison, sweetheart, we're family. Of course, Bella assumed you'd be supportive of her career goals, especially when they align so well with what would benefit everyone." Dad nodded in agreement. "We've always taught you girls to support each other. This is exactly the kind of collaboration that makes families stronger." I looked around the table at 3 faces that were beginning to show signs of concern, like they were starting to realize that this conversation wasn't going according to their script. "You're absolutely right, Dad. Families should support each other, and collaboration works best when everyone involved has a chance to participate in the planning process." Bella's defensive expression was getting more pronounced. "Madison, I thought you'd be excited about this. We're talking about building something together using our combined skills to create content that could benefit both of our careers. I'm sure it could be beneficial for your career, Bella. What I'm curious about is when you plan to ask whether it would be beneficial for mine. The room went quiet, except for the sound of the heating system cycling on and the distant hum of traffic from the street outside. Mom tried to smooth over what she clearly saw as a minor misunderstanding. Well, of course we want this to work for everyone. That's why we thought it would be nice to discuss the details as a family so we can make sure everyone's needs are met. Dad leaned forward with his most reasonable expression. Madison, if you have concerns about the arrangement, we're certainly open to discussing modifications. The important thing is that we're all working toward the same goals. I took another sip of champagne and realized that this was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since I signed the sales contract on my house. Actually, Dad, I think we might have very different goals. And I think there might be some basic facts about the situation that we should clarify before we continue planning. Bella straightened in her chair, her Instagram-perfect posture reflecting years of posing for photos. What kind of facts, Madison? I looked at each of them in turn, savoring the last few seconds before I dropped the bomb that would change everything. Well, for starters, the fact that I sold the house last week. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Bella's mouth fell open, her phone slipping from her suddenly limp fingers and clattering onto the table. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, like he'd heard words that didn't make sense in any language he understood. Mom's face went through a rapid series of emotions: surprise, confusion, hurt, and finally something that looked like betrayal. Nobody spoke for what felt like several minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. Finally, Bella found her voice, though it came out smaller and less confident than I'd heard from her in years. "You what?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it on the table next to the good china and expensive champagne. "I sold it last week. The buyers took possession on Tuesday. Here's a copy of the closing paperwork if you'd like to review the details." Bella grabbed the envelope with shaking hands, pulling out the documents and scanning them like she was looking for evidence that this was some kind of elaborate joke. "But this says the sale closed 5 days ago." "That's correct." Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. "Madison, how could you make a decision like this without telling your family, the same way you made decisions about my living situation without asking me?" Dad's engineering mind was trying to process the timeline and implications. "You sold your house while we were making plans that depended on you having that house." I smiled at him with the same calm expression I used with difficult clients who tried to negotiate terms that were never on the table. "That's exactly what I did, Dad. Just like you made plans that depended on my cooperation without checking whether I was actually willing to cooperate." The look of betrayal on Mom's face was almost enough to make me feel guilty, but not quite. "Madison, this affects the whole family. How could you keep something this important secret from the people who love you?" I leaned back in my chair and looked around the table at 3 people who were finally beginning to understand that their problem-solving approach had a fundamental flaw. "Mom, you just spent 2 weeks planning to move Bella into my house without asking whether I wanted a roommate. You discussed redecorating my space, restructuring my daily routine, and turning my home into a content creation studio without once inquiring about my preferences. But somehow, I'm the one who should have consulted the family before making decisions about my own property." The truth of that statement hit the table like a physical weight. Bella was still staring at the closing documents, her carefully planned future crumbling in real time. "Madison, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Why would you sabotage something that could have been good for both of us?" I looked at my sister, who genuinely seemed to believe that my refusal to subsidize her lifestyle constituted sabotage. "Bella, I didn't sabotage anything. I made a smart financial decision about my own property. The fact that your plans depended on my house doesn't make my decision wrong. It makes your planning presumptuous." Dad was struggling to maintain his composed, problem-solving demeanor in the face of a solution that had made all of his analysis irrelevant. "Madison, this is a very serious decision. Are you sure you've thought through all the implications? I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of my new downtown condo. Actually, Dad, I've thought it through very carefully. I bought a 2-bedroom condo downtown that fits my actual needs and budget. No more expensive repairs on a 20-year-old house, no more maintenance headaches, and no more space that apparently belongs to the family rather than to me. The three of them stared at the photo like I was showing them evidence of an alien spacecraft. You bought a new place and moved without telling anyone. I moved Tuesday afternoon, Mom. I've been living in my new home for 5 days. Bella finally looked up from the closing documents, and I could see her Instagram-ready composure completely dissolving. Madison, do you have any idea what this means for me? I gave notice to my landlord. I told Tyler we were moving in together at your place. I've been planning content around this collaboration for weeks. I met her eyes directly, and for the first time in our relationship, I didn't feel any desire to soften the truth to protect her feelings. Bella, what this means for you is exactly what it's meant for me my entire adult life. You're going to have to figure out your own solutions to your own problems. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Less shocked, more thoughtful. Like 3 people were finally beginning to understand that the person they'd been taking for granted had just removed herself from their equation entirely. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely, perfectly free. But I wasn't done yet. I looked around the table at my family who were still processing the magnitude of what had just happened and realized that this was only the beginning of the conversation we needed to have. The sale of my house had solved my immediate problem, but it hadn't addressed the underlying dynamic that had created the problem in the first place. That conversation was going to require a different kind of courage and a different kind of truth. But first, I wanted to enjoy this moment a little longer. The moment when I'd finally stopped being the family resource manager and started being a person with agency over my own life. I raised my champagne glass one more time, meeting each of their shocked expressions with the calmest smile I'd worn in years. To problem solve, I said, taking a slow sip of the expensive champagne they'd bought to celebrate their plan to redistribute my assets, and to learn the difference between family support and family exploitation. The evening was about to get very interesting. The explosion started exactly 30 seconds after I toasted to problem solving. Bella threw the closing documents across the table, scattering papers between the orange chicken and fried rice like confetti at the world's most dysfunctional celebration. You did this on purpose, Madison. You knew I was counting on this, and you deliberately sabotaged my plans because you can't stand seeing me succeed. Her voice had shifted from shocked confusion to pure fury, and I could see years of suppressed resentment finally bubbling to the surface. Mom's reaction was quieter, but somehow more devastating. She just stared at me with tears starting to form in her eyes, like I'd personally betrayed everything she'd ever believed about family loyalty. Madison. I don't understand how you could keep something this important from us. We're your family. We should have been part of this decision. Dad tried to maintain his engineering composure, but I could see the anger building behind his careful expression. This is extremely disappointing, Madison. You've made a unilateral decision that affects the entire family without any consultation or consideration for how it impacts other people's plans. I set down my champagne glass and looked around the table at 3 people who genuinely seemed to believe that I owed them control over my major life decisions. Dad. I'm 35 years old. I bought that house with my own money, maintained it with my own labor, and sold it to protect my own financial future. At what point in that process was I obligated to get family approval? Bella stood up so abruptly that her chair nearly fell backward. You were obligated the moment I needed your help. That's what family means, Madison. When someone you love is struggling, you don't just abandon them to make yourself more comfortable. The word struggling hit me like a physical slap. Struggling. Bella. You're 28 years old with no job, no income, no savings, and no plan for supporting yourself. Mom and Dad have given you over $180,000 in the past 6 years, and you've used that money to fund a fake lifestyle on social media. That's not struggling. That's refusing to grow up. Mom gasped, like I'd said something unforgivable. Madison Chen, that is enough. Your sister is going through a difficult transition, and families support each other during difficult times. I turned to face her directly, feeling years of frustration finally finding their voice. Mom, what transition? Bella dropped out of college 6 years ago, and she's been living the exact same lifestyle ever since. She wakes up at noon, posts fake content on Instagram, and spends money she didn't earn on things she doesn't need. Where exactly is the transition happening? Dad's voice took on the stern tone he'd used when I was a teenager and had broken curfew. Madison, you're being unnecessarily harsh. We've always taught you girls to support each other, and this conversation is not reflecting well on the values your mother and I tried to instill in you. The values lecture was the last straw. I stood up and faced all three of them, feeling 35 years of being the responsible daughter finally reaching its breaking point. Dad, let's talk about values for a minute. Let's talk about the value of hard work, which I learned by watching you get up at 5 every morning for 30 years to go to Boeing. Let's talk about the value of financial responsibility, which I learned by paying my own way through college while Bella got a free ride. Let's talk about the value of earning what you have, which I've been practicing my entire adult life while you've been teaching Bella that tears and manipulation work just as well as effort. I could see the shock on their faces, but I wasn't finished. And let's talk about the value of respect, which apparently means I'm supposed to respect everyone else's needs and preferences while my own needs and preferences are treated like suggestions that can be overruled by family consensus. Bella's voice was getting higher and more desperate. Madison, you don't understand what it's like to be the younger sister of someone who's perfect at everything. Do you have any idea how much pressure I've been under my whole life to live up to your success? Perfect at everything. I actually laughed out loud. Bella, I'm not perfect at everything. I'm just willing to work for what I want instead of expecting other people to hand it to me. There's a difference. Mom tried to restore order with her mediator voice, the tone she'd used to break up our fights when we were children. Girls, this isn't helping anyone. We need to focus on finding solutions that work for everyone instead of attacking each other. Solutions that work for everyone. Mom, like the solution where I give up my financial security and personal space so Bella doesn't have to get a job. Like the solution where I sacrifice my boundaries and independence so you and Dad don't have to acknowledge that your parenting approach created an adult who can't function in the real world. Dad's face was getting red, which usually meant he was about to deliver one of his final word pronouncements. Madison, that is completely out of line. Your mother and I have done our best to raise both of you girls according to our values and capabilities. If you have complaints about your childhood, this is neither the time nor the place to air them. Actually, Dad, I think this is exactly the time and place, because my childhood is directly relevant to why we're sitting here having this conversation. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through photos looking for the evidence I needed to make my point. Do you remember when I was 16 and wanted to go to that summer business camp at UC Davis? You told me I could go if I earned half the tuition money myself. So I worked extra shifts at the restaurant, saved every penny, and earned my way into that program. I found the photo I was looking for, 16-year-old me in my restaurant uniform, exhausted but smiling after another long shift. That same summer, Bella wanted to go to cheerleading camp. She didn't work for it, didn't save for it, didn't earn it. She just wanted it, and you paid the full cost without question because she said her friends would be disappointed if she couldn't go. Mom's voice was getting defensive. Madison, we had different financial circumstances then, and we made the best decisions we could for both of our daughters. Did you, Mom? Because what I learned that summer was that I had to prove I deserved opportunities while Bella just had to ask for them. And that lesson has been reinforced in every major decision our family has made since then. I started counting on my fingers, ticking off examples that had been building up for years. College, I worked multiple jobs and took out loans. Bella got full financial support with no strings attached. First apartments, I scraped together deposits and struggled with rent. You co-signed Bella's lease and paid her security deposit. Career development. I built my business through long hours and client relationships. Bella got a monthly allowance to pursue her dreams without any accountability for results. Dad was trying to interrupt, but I wasn't done. Cars, I bought my first car with money I'd saved from work. Bella got a brand new car as a graduation gift from high school. Credit cards, I built my credit slowly and carefully. You co-signed Bella's cards and paid them off twice when she maxed them out. Housing, I saved for years to afford my house. And when that house became financially problematic, your solution was to give Bella access to it, rather than expect her to solve her own housing situation. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet after my initial announcement. This was the heavy silence of people being forced to confront patterns they'd been avoiding for years. Bella's voice was much smaller when she finally spoke. Madison, I never asked you to resent me for the way Mom and Dad treated us differently. You're right, Bella. You never asked me to resent you. But you also never acknowledged that the way we were treated differently was unfair, and you certainly never hesitated to take advantage of that unfairness when it benefited you. I turned back to my parents, who were looking increasingly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had taken. Mom, Dad, I want you to understand something clearly. I don't hate Bella, and I don't regret working hard for what I have. But I'm done pretending that family loyalty means I'm obligated to subsidize a lifestyle I would never choose for myself, for someone who's never shown any gratitude for the sacrifices other people have made to support her choices. Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin, smearing her carefully applied makeup. Madison, what do you want us to do? Bella is our daughter too, and we can't just abandon her when she needs help. I sat back down and looked directly at both of my parents. I want you to help her by expecting her to help herself. I want you to stop treating my success as a family resource and start treating Bella's dependence as a problem that needs to be solved rather than a condition that needs to be managed. Dad leaned forward with his most serious expression. And what exactly does that look like in practical terms? It looks like Bella is getting a job. Any job. It looks like she is paying her own bills, managing her own transportation, and taking responsibility for her own housing situation. It looks like you are setting boundaries around how much financial support you're willing to provide, instead of draining your retirement accounts every time she has a crisis. Bella was crying now, but I could tell they were angry tears rather than sad ones. So your solution is to just cut me off and let me figure everything out on my own, even though I've never had to do that before I met her eyes and spoke as gently as I could while still telling the truth. Bella, my solution is for you to start learning the skills that most people develop in their early 20s. It's not punishment. It's catching up on the education and independence that you should have received years ago. The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through anger, defensiveness, hurt feelings, and occasional moments of recognition that maybe, possibly, some of what I was saying had merit. But by the time I gathered my purse and prepared to leave, I could see that the fundamental dynamic had shifted in ways that couldn't be undone. My parents could no longer assume that my resources were available for redistribution. Bella could no longer count on my success to subsidize her fantasy lifestyle, and I was no longer willing to sacrifice my own financial security to maintain their illusion that enabling someone was the same thing as helping them. As I walked to my car, I could hear voices rising behind me, continuing the argument I'd started but would no longer participate in. For the first time in my adult life, their crisis was not my emergency, and that felt like the most valuable thing I'd ever owned.